about our facilitator. Our virtual book club facilitator is a speaker, author, and the founder of the consulting firm Generations Health Education, Inc. Currently a gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University and has been featured on ABC, CBS, SiriusXM, and in Forbes, U.S. News and World Report, Fast Company, and many other media outlets. One of less than 800 certified speaking professionals worldwide, she is the author of the Amazon bestseller, Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One, which is currently 99 cents for Kindle version. Join me in welcoming from Kent Island, Maryland, Jennifer L. FitzPatrick, MSW, CSP.
Hi, everybody. It's Jen. Welcome to the Virtual Book Club for Dementia Caregivers, sponsored by Hilarity for Charity and Oasis Senior Advisors. And today we're going to be talking about work, career, job stuff. And we're going to be getting into all of the comments and questions that you have, so feel free to write in at any point. We are very excited to have you here today. I can't believe it's the 6th session. Please remember, if you haven't been to all of our sessions, you can attend on the YouTube page that gets sent out after each session. So share them with anybody you know that might be interested in the topic on caregiving that we are talking about on a particular day. So I have the distinct pleasure of being able to welcome somebody that I have admired from afar for quite a long time, Amy Goyer. Amy is a caregiver, author, speaker, consultant. Amy started out as a music therapist many years ago, and she has taken care of her parents in her personal life, but she is AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, resident caregiver expert, and she is the author of a fantastic book called Juggling Life, Work, and Caregiving. So it's another book that we really hope that you pick up. It's available on Amazon. So want to welcome Amy to our program today. Amy Goyer, if you would share your screen, or you share your camera, we'd love to welcome you on.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be
here. We're
here.
so glad to have you here today because even it looks like, yes.
I'm not hearing anything.
My screen is frozen up a little bit, so we'll give it a minute. Amy, now my screen's freezing up. Technology is fantastic when it works.
I know, we're still relying on it, and it's great.
You know what? I think everybody gets it if they're joining us. But Amy, welcome. We're really excited. While Cruising Through Caregiving has one chapter about caregiving and work, Amy wrote an entire book about it. So Amy, can you tell us a little bit about why you were so motivated to write this book?
Well, you know, as you mentioned, I've been a caregiver actually for my grandparents starting at the ripe old age of 21, when I was still in college. And through my years working as a music therapist, working for the Ohio Department of Aging, and then working full-time for AARP, and now I'm a consultant. But I have had many different work situations and cared for many different people. So I've cared for my grandparents long distance, I've cared for my sister long distance, and for both of my parents and miscellaneous other family members and friends. But you know, throughout that experience, work is truly one of the most important aspects because I couldn't not work. And I knew I had to juggle everything. So I thought I wanted to include, I have a whole chapter in my book about working caregivers with tips and ideas and things that you can deal with.
Wonderful. Absolutely. So we're so excited. You were, when I started, Hilarity for Charity, and again, quick thank you again to Hilarity for Charity, Oasis Senior Advisors, hilarityforcharity.org, oasissenior-advisors.com for being our sponsors for this 15-week book club. You were one of the first people that I was hoping to get on because of your expertise with career and caregiving. So we really are delighted to have you here today. I know you're going to help a lot of people. So before we jump into the content today, I want to do a quick poll. And I want to ask the audience for today, for those of you who are joining us live, why might you, as a caregiver, consider quitting your job, early retirement, going part-time? And I want you to choose all that apply to you. And if for some reason you happen to be on this program and you're not a caregiver currently, I want you to put yourself in the position of a caregiver. So take a few moments and just choose every one that apply to you. We'll take a moment, see what those results are.
You know, I think I could check off every box from one of my caregiving experiences.
It's interesting to hear what people have to say.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not close to retirement, but, you know, I think everybody deals with a lot of these issues when they're caregiving.
So we're still tallying up the results. In a moment, we'll get them to you. But the interesting thing is, and you know this, Amy, is most people at some point at least think about this concept. Even if they never do it, even if they never quit or go part-time or retire early, most people at least think about it. Well, should I change my work situation?
Yeah, most, 6 in 10 family caregivers are working, and the vast majority make some type of adjustment in their work situation because of caregiving.
So here's what everybody said. So 70% of all of us who were polled said they would think they'd be a better caregiver if they didn't work. 20% have that trust issue, don't want anybody else caring, don't like my job anyway, 10%. Nobody said the break-even one. I've actually heard that from a lot of people.
Yes, how did I? Yeah.
Yeah, my loved one's more important than work, 60%, close to retirement anyway. And then 30%, which is I think, pretty high for this question, you're never going to consider that. So it's so nice to hear what everybody's thinking at the beginning of this.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Okay, so in moving into a little bit more of a conversation about this issue of work and caregiving, what do you think about people saying, the 70% of people saying they might be able to be a better caregiver if they stop working? What do you think about that, Amy?
I think it's because people feel so torn. I always say guilt is our constant companion because, I can remember feeling when I'm working, I feel guilty because I'm not with my loved ones. And when I'm with my loved ones, I feel guilty because I feel like I should always have something that I'm doing with work. So that aspect is very stressful and it's very draining. So we often feel like if we could just focus on caregiving, we would be better at it. We wouldn't be as tired. We wouldn't be as stressed out. We'd have more time. I mean, the truth is the time is really the biggest factor when you're working and caregiving.
What do you think about that, Amy? Do you think that works for most people, for some people, if they just quit? What do you think?
Well, the problem is that there are long-term repercussions if you stop working. And, over a lifetime, people stand to lose an average of $300,000 in lifetime benefits and wages if they leave the workforce for caregiving. So it's a big issue. You also have to think about all the other ways that work benefits you. I did leave my full-time job in order to be a consultant and have more flexibility, but I don't have benefits. I don't have the workplace supports, like even a gym, a facility where you can work out, or the employee assistance program. So all of those things are big things to consider. Your long-term career, you may not have the opportunity to have various career opportunities if you stop doing what you're doing now. On the other hand, for some people, it gives them a new direction. And they end up, when they're done caregiving, they do a different type of work because they found what they were doing before wasn't fulfilling to them. So I've heard a really wide variety of experiences.
That's a really interesting point. So as Darlene mentioned in the beginning, I actually teach at the Johns Hopkins Certificate on Aging program, and it's actually a program where it's a certificate. It's not a graduate or bachelor's degree, but a lot of people that take the classes and get the certificate, that's why they're there. That they were caregiving and they said to themselves, you know what, maybe I could make a career out of this. And there really are so many careers that are available. We need people in this field desperately.
Absolutely. You know, my sister actually left. She was doing some work in Ohio, and she moved out to Arizona to help me take care of my parents, and I paid her as a caregiver because she couldn't help out in that way and not have another job. And she, you know, then after my parents and my sister have all passed away now, but my sister is able to do elder care work because she has so much experience now. Many people do that type of thing, or else they go into consulting, or they work on a hotline, or they work for a nonprofit that's supporting family caregivers. You know, in my book, at the end of every chapter, I have a job description, because I feel like as we go through caregiving, we become experts on a lot of things. We get a lot of experience with healthcare and legal issues and, you know, caregiving at home, facilities, all of it. And so if you look at that at the end of my book, you have a really kind of a good job description of experience that you've gained.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit? I bet there's a lot of people wondering. I'm surprised no one's written in with a question yet. But you mentioned that you paid your sister to be a caregiver. How did you go about doing that?
So there are different ways to pay family caregivers. In our situation, my dad had long-term care insurance. He also had veterans aid and attendance benefits, as well as his Social Security and his pensions. So I paid her just from a combination of those funds. His long-term care insurance was a type that he got a monthly reimbursement, and it was just a flat amount per day that was direct deposited in his account. Some long-term care insurances require that you work with an agency, so that's a different thing. But see, if you hire people directly, your money goes further. So since we were not required to work through an agency, I was able to do that. And she was not the only paid caregiver. We had other caregivers throughout the years that helped manage that. And, you know, I always say I spent at least 70, 80 hours a week caring for my parents and worked full time. And, you know, that's nights and weekends and everything else. So right. You still have to build that team. So I don't know, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but.
No, it's great information.
But you can pay people from your private funds. You can pay through long-term care insurance, or if you have other income coming into the household to help pay for it. If people are on Medicaid, in some states, they have programs where the cash follows the person and they get to choose who their caregivers are. And then the caregiver is paid through Medicaid. It's not a ton of money, but it helps for a lot of people, especially if they're needing to quit work and they're focusing on caring for their loved ones.
So it's interesting because with your case, you made the point about long-term care insurance, and not everybody has it, but thankfully your father did have it. So there are different policies. So if you're participating today and you're thinking, wow, this sounds like a good idea, maybe our family should do this, definitely look at your long-term care insurance policy. I usually, and in Cruising Through Caregiving, I talk about going to an elder law attorney to make sure you're setting it up nice and tight. Somebody through NALA, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, just make sure that you're doing it in a way that's legal and that there's not going to be issues with taxes and things like that. I'm wondering, did you use an attorney to set that up, or did you not need to do that?
I did not need to use an attorney. I know enough from my work, how to set up the agreement. But the other issue is with taxes, and it's really important because a family member can gift another family member a rather large amount of money per year without being taxed. So that's one option to go. But if you're being paid directly like that and no taxes or Social Security being taken out, you need to think about the fact that for all those years you're not contributing to your Social Security, and that you won't have that when you're older and you need that. So be sure and consider all that. And if you're not, familiar with all of these things, I totally echo, Jen, your recommendation to speak with an elder law attorney or someone who can really give you sound advice. I think it's really a good idea to talk to a financial advisor and look at what the options are, what makes the most sense financially and for the long term of everyone involved. You know, some long-term care insurances don't even cover home care. They only cover assisted living or long-term care facility, skilled nursing. So you also need to really know what the long-term care policy covers.
And they're all different, absolutely. Also, just real quick, wanted to mention that in terms of working with an elder law attorney, don't realize that even though maybe you have a family attorney, maybe you have an attorney for business, they're not always aware that that's something that can be done. So if you don't know how to do it, like Amy knew how to do it because she's a professional in this field, definitely seek the proper advice from a certified elder law attorney or your financial professional. So, but thank you for bringing that up. I'm really glad that was a great segue into that topic.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's something that again, one of the most common questions I get is how you can get paid to be a caregiver for your loved ones, because this whole work situation can be really tricky.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people think, well, it's my mom, it's my sister, I don't need to be paid, but why did your sister accept money?
Yes, that's really true. I think a lot of people feel funny. And I just recently was speaking with someone who told me that she she's had to limit, she's self-employed, she has a shop, and she has to limit her hours in her shop because she's caring for her mother who lives with her. Her husband is only, his income is fairly limited. So they are struggling to, they want their mom there. She wants to take care of her. And she said, would you be okay paying me a small amount every month just to help, because I'm not able to work myself as much. And her mother was very offended, very hurt that she would want to get paid to care for her. And this person's concern, really frustration was that her sister, who lives across the country and not doing anything, and yet here she is, she's doing so much, and her mom can't contribute. She said she does contribute somewhat to the utilities and that sort of thing. But, you don't know what you're going to get. People respond very differently. My parents were more than happy. My view was, I have to pay someone to help me because I can't do it all.
Of course.
And I'd rather pay my sister, who is a family member. I travel a lot for my work. So when I was out of town, we wanted a family member to be here always, even if we had other caregivers. And by the time my parents needed 24-hour care, that was becoming really difficult. So they moved into the house with me, and that's how we worked it. And, I think my sister is very practical about it in that she has a family to support, and she needs, an income, of course.
Of course.
So for our family, it wasn't a big deal. It just made sense.
Yeah, but I think have those conversations and sort of, I think, say, look, if we don't do this, maybe I'm not going to be able to be here. I have to work at my shop more hours, and maybe we have to hire an aide, and you're going to have to pay them. And so sometimes having those conversations, but I know sometimes it feels funny, like, why would you pay? But it's a legitimate, in most states, a very legal way to handle it. And it's a way that you can supplement your income if your loved one has the money to be able to pay. So great. Thank you for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. What I want to say to everybody is, if you are on this program and you've stopped working because you want to be a caregiver to your loved one who has dementia, and of course the virtual book club for dementia caregivers, while cruising through caregiving and Amy's book are for all kinds of caregiving, this program is we're specifically focusing on dementia caregiving. If you stop working and you're providing care to your mom, your grandmother, your uncle, and it's fine, everything's working out great, wonderful. We're not trying to convince you to go back to work. That's not what this is about. What we're trying to say is, if you're trying to make a decision, or if you've left the workplace and you don't know what to do because you think you should go back because you need money, that's what this is all about today. So we're not trying to prevent you from stopping work if you really think it through. We just want you to think it through. So how do you decide if you're on the fence about this decision? So Amy already brought up some of these terrific hidden costs that people don't think about. I mean, I've had conversations where, Amy, you talked about your own story a little bit. about some of the things like when you became a consultant rather than working at a job, that you were, just the gym, the office gym. That's one thing that some people would never think about until they've actually left.
Yeah, sometimes the health and wellness benefits at work are a really big help for those who are caregiving. We have increased stress, our time is short. Being able to go to the gym at lunchtime, it can be a really big help, or sometimes workplaces have yoga classes, or, they're just all sorts of things depending on the type of employer you have, the type of work you do. But many times there are those things. There's also legal benefits. Sometimes there are reduced cost legal assistance. There may be someone there who can help you figure out all of the insurance paperwork. So, think pretty broadly about what the benefits are at work. And for many of us, work is our social network. So if you quit work, then you're losing some of your support system.
Yes.
And, that's a big deal too. That was very hard for me to leave that. You stay in touch with people, but it's different. It is different than seeing them on a daily basis. So, just think broadly, about what you get out of work.
Absolutely. And it's not just the money. I think sometimes people do and you were alluding to this a little bit earlier, I call it bad math. So I make X amount and assisted living would cost X amount. So if I quit, then no, it's really not evening out. So just be really mindful, like you brought up the gym or the yoga classes, but also the benefits that you have in paid time off, or the benefits that you have health insurance, if you have long-term care insurance as a result of your job. So some other hidden costs. One of the things that I see, so in Cruising Through Caregiving, we talk about the rest of the team being your crew. We use boating analogies in Cruising Through Caregiving. And one of the things that I've seen to a lot of people who stop working, whether they were retired or they're not working, is everybody else is like, you don't have a job. You do everything now. Maybe not consciously, but their expectation is, you're not working.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good point. Yeah, they're going to be like, then she quit her job to do this, so she's doing it.
Well, I remember when we were taking care of my grandma, and my dad and my uncle were retired. So there were probably, about 14 of us involved in care. We were very fortunate, very blessed. You don't usually get that number of people involved.
Right.
But I remember my uncle and my dad were retired, and which is, the statistics, more often it's women doing the work. They were doing a lot. And I sat the family down and I said, guys, we have to be really careful that we don't just say, they're retired, they should do everything. We had to be really mindful that, we all, even though so many of us had jobs, we can take some time, or we need to give them breaks, because it's not, just because they're retired doesn't mean this is their full-time gig now.
Right. When you retire, you have other dreams and goals and things to do, and you have to take care of yourself. But it's also risking that person gets really burnt out.
Exactly.
You don't want that to happen either, or gets physically ill.
Absolutely. So we want to just be mindful that if you are not working and you do see that the rest of the caregiving crew sort of, maybe intentionally, maybe not intentionally, just realize that that's potentially another hidden cost. You brought this up, Amy, missing your colleagues, missing your role. You have been in this field. Amy's been in this field for
35 plus years, believe it or not.
And, I bet if you completely left, you would miss using that part of your brain.
Absolutely. One of the things that I talk a lot about is that you can feel lost in caregiving. There were times when I felt myself feeling like I just had lost myself in caregiving, because everything in my life focused around making the caregiving work. And those were times when I had to step back and remember, okay, who am I? What is my identity? My identity is a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter, but my identity is also an individual, as a person who knows things, a worker, all of the other parts of who you are. I'm a musician. All of those things are important. And work gives you that identity factor. And it might be you change your work situation, but you don't want to give it up completely, because you need to maintain that connection with yourself.
So important, so important. And for those of you who are on, and you might be saying, well, maybe I don't love my job as much as Amy does. Think about, it might be that you miss seeing your colleagues. You miss, again, just using that different part of your brain. So we're not trying to say work is perfect or overemphasize that everybody's job is the dream. We're not saying that, but even if it's, you don't feel as strongly as maybe Amy does, it's probable that there might be other things about that social aspect or that using your brain aspect of your job that you may miss sometimes.
And sometimes I thought of it as the analogy with parents who stay home with their children and they're around children all day, and then they want some adult time. For me with caregiving, when you're with someone all day that you're taking care of, you're focus on them. And it's nice to also balance that with some time with peers. And that's really an important part of the support system.
You brought this up earlier. Can you go back at the same level? So if you leave, that's another possible hidden cost. You go back in 5 years, especially if you're in a field where there, technical skills, or, if you let a license or a certification expire. So that's something to think about, because the truth is, for a lot of us caregivers, and for those of you who are taking care of someone with dementia, the person does pass away eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's this feeling of loss. And now what do I do? My dad passed away just a year ago last week. And
I'm so sorry.
So now, yeah, thank you. It's been a rough year. And my mom passed away in 2013 and my sister in 2014. So I'm in this place now where I've been so focused on caring really my entire adult life. There's always been somebody, and as I said, I still have neighbors and friends and my aunt and uncle and people who I'm helping, but it's a very different role. So now what? There's this sense of trying to restore who you are. And part of that is going back to work, perhaps. And if you aren't able to go back, and then you're not able to be doing what you were doing before, that can be kind of a setback. It can actually make it harder to go on with life after caregiving.
Well said. The other one that I think is really important is financial pressures on your marriage or your relationship. So if you're single or divorced or widowed and you don't have a partner or spouse, this might not apply to you. But for those of you who do, it's really important to remember, if you're in a partnership where both folks work and one of you decides to stop, and even if you have agreement about it, that can put some additional pressure on that relationship. So I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but think it through. How will you feel? Will your partner or spouse really be supportive? Or if your spouse or partner is asking you, hey, I think I'm going to go part-time, I'm going to quit, I'm going to retire early, do you feel truly supportive, and for how long? Is it just a short period of time, a long period of time? So I think that's another hidden cost that a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people wait until they are so on the edge that I have to quit my job. And there isn't that time for these conversations about the long-time repercussions and the financial stress and what really makes sense. Is it's not an all or nothing thing necessarily. You can make changes in your job without quitting it completely.
And more employers are starting to get it. You speak at conferences also. I speak at conferences where organizations are trying to say, like, how do we retain good talent when we know that we have all of these people, not just childcare, but elder care? So a lot of organizations will work with you.
Yes, it's where, there's still a lot of work to be done, but AARP has been working a lot with employers to try and raise awareness, to talk about the options. The bottom line is that employees are valuable and experience is valuable. And employers are waking up to it, as you said, and really working to find ways to increase flexibility in the workplace.
Right. It's not perfect, but things are getting better. And AARP has a lot to do with that. A lot.
Yeah, they've worked really, really hard in that area and continue to be working on that.
Just curious, if somebody feels like they aren't really getting anywhere, they really don't want to leave their job, is there any resources at AARP that you would recommend? Anything on the website? Is there anything in particular that you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, in my book, I do have a whole chapter on work and talk about the various options that you might consider. AARP has a great website for caregivers, and it's just www.aarp.org/caregiving. And if you go there, there's a section on work-life balance, on life balance. And in that section, we have a lot of great resources around work. So check that out. And also, we have some great resources on for employers about how to educate employers about what kind of resources they can offer their employees, the flexible options they can work on, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. If anybody, again, I just want to reiterate, if anyone has any questions at all, feel free to jump in. How often are you going to get a chance to ask Amy a question directly? So if you're on live, feel free to jump in. What are your other options besides quitting? Communicating with the employer, and as Amy said, AARP has some great suggestions on how to do that. Test run Family Medical Leave Act. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Amy.
Yeah, the Family Medical Leave Act is for specific people, and not everyone has this available to them. It's for employers that have more than 50 employees and within a certain mile radius, and you have to have been working a certain number of hours the year prior to asking for family medical leave. But it is an unpaid leave, and part of that is to, quote, guarantee that you will come back to your job at either the same job or a similar job at the same level. So even if they say, we can't do without you for 6 months or for however long it's really 12 weeks, right? We can't do without you. We're going to put someone else in that position. But when you come back, we'll have another position for you that's at the same level, same pay, similar job. That's one option to, as you say, take a test run on what it's like to function without that income and what it's like to be able to focus solely on the caregiving and not have the distractions of work. And a lot of times people realize that, they miss work. I always say work was a respite for me. It's always been that other thing that gets me out of the caregiving mode that I need. And also, the financial aspects can be surprising. You can think, well, I don't make that much money, but then when you start really living without it, you can really, it can affect you more than you realize. And a lot of times for people, that FMLA 12 weeks gets them through a crisis or gets them through the harder part. And they find, that they find out ways that gives them time to set up other care options, because sometimes this happens, there's a heart attack or there's a stroke or there's a crisis, and then they have to suddenly get all this in place. And so they can take some time to get that all in place so they can go back to work.
Yeah, and just communicate. Listen, you don't want to tell your employer every painstaking detail of how stressful your life is with your mom or your husband, but talk to human resources. It's fascinating how so many organizations have services that their employees don't even know about, that they have never thought to ask human resources. So just ask the question. I know at my husband's organization, they have some supplemental care that they'll pay for a certain amount of care for a caregiver. And we didn't know that for a really long time. And it's one of those things that a lot of people at his organization didn't know. So just ask, and again, you don't have to share everything. You don't have to give every detail, but just like somebody who's a new parent, you'd say, okay, I have a child. What are there benefits for me? Any support you can offer? It's the same idea. And more people are starting to understand this concept because more and more people are facing caregiving than ever before.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you're so right that if it's not something we need at the time, we're often unaware of resources and benefits and supports that are out there in the community and at work. So definitely ask about that. I just spoke the other day with an employee, an AARP employee who works in one of the state offices. He was unaware of some of the things. And you think, oh, it's an aging organization. Everybody knows everything. But, again, if she hadn't needed it in her personal life previously,
Right.
because she wasn't aware of some of the ports. So, for example, AARP has an employee resource group for caregiving. And that's a great way for employees to connect with others who are in similar situations, provides education and speakers and that sort of thing. So, yeah, absolutely check into it.
So another example, and in the book, we've talked about the MET exercise in the book club. And if you've read the book, Cruising Through Caregiving, the MET exercise is all about how to plug in those secondary and tertiary caregivers where you can find free and low cost help. So go back to that MET exercise and think about where you can plug in those for Plan B. So Plan B at work, Plan B at home. What might be a non-negotiable, like you have to go on a work trip, you really have to be there, or there's a doctor's appointment that you really need to be there. So just try to create some of those Plan Bs. I'm sure you have plenty of experience with that, Amy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and then you have to have a Plan C because Plan B doesn't always work either.
Right.
So, that's one of the hard things is the unpredictability of caregiving. When you're working, you never know when you're going to get that phone call. Or when, I can remember one time when my mom had a fall during the night. So during the night, I'm at the hospital, I'm there all day, and I wasn't focused on what my schedule was for the next day. And I had a conference call that I totally missed because I was focused on my mom and I was exhausted from being up all night with her in the hospital. And, those are the things that are just, sometimes those things are going to happen. But you also, and that's one of the reasons why it's helpful for your employer to know that you're in this situation. Again, like you say, the main thing with your employer is to assure them that you are committed to your job. And yes, you're committed to your family as well, but that you both are important to you and that you're doing everything you can. And that's the key thing. You just don't want them to think, oh, she doesn't really care. She's just missing meetings. She's coming into work late. She's, constantly taking time off and because she isn't into her job. So I think that's a really important part of the whole equation.
Definitely. Another thought is change the job. Sometimes people are saying, well, my boss isn't being flexible. My organization doesn't have resources. They don't seem to be supportive. Probably for a lot of you, if you're caregiving for a loved one who has dementia, the last thing you want to be doing is looking for a new job, but it might be something that you want to start considering if you still want to remain in the workforce, but you don't think that it's going to match up with the job that you have right now. So with your caregiving duties. So it's another option that we all have is to consider that. And again, I know it's not easy. It's easier said than done, but it is something to think about.
And sometimes you can change your job within the same organization.
Right.
It might be that you're a manager and you're having trouble, dealing with everything and you just want to step down and not be a manager anymore. Or it might be that you can transfer to another job location. And then that way that you're closer to your loved ones. Might be that there's a less stressful position that you can deal with for a while, but you want to stay with the organization. So that's another option to think about, that changing your job doesn't always mean a huge job search. It might be just changing it where you are currently.
And maybe even just temporarily.
Exactly, yes. And I think that's important to discuss with your employer, that and that's hard too, though, because we never know how long caregiving is going to go on. It's like the marathon with no end. So, when I became a consultant and I moved out to Arizona to take care of my parents, I had no idea how long that was going to be. I had no idea it was going to be 10 years. If I'd thought about that and known that, I don't know what I would have done. But, I couldn't have said to someone, can you give me a temporary position? And then 10 years later, so it's one of the big challenges, I think, for caregivers, not knowing how long it's going to go on.
Especially with dementia caregiving.
Right.
Because it's so, I mean, people live for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You don't know how long your loved one is going to be, how long they're going to remain in certain stages. So it's very, very well said. Well,
Yeah, my dad had Alzheimer's, just real quick. My dad had Alzheimer's, and when he died a year ago, he was 94. And he didn't even show symptoms till he was around 80, 81. So, you want it to go on as long as you can, but at the same time, you have to manage life, during that decade or more.
yeah. I share a lot is when somebody has hip replacement surgery, and it's going to be like a short period of time where you have to be with them and help them and get them to rehab, and it's not the same thing with a lot of long-term caregiving, especially dementia caregiving.
Absolutely. I actually did that for my dad before his Alzheimer's symptoms became apparent. Came out and I telecommuted for a month while he recovered from his hip replacement. My mom had a stroke when she was only 63, so he had to help her, and so I helped her and walked the dogs and made the meals and did the things while he was recovering. But he did recover, and I went back to work.
So
I didn't stop work. I should be clear about that. I telecommuted, so I didn't actually have to take time off work. I took some vacation time, but you can sometimes telecommute for a period of time and continue your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to thank again Hilarity for Charity and Oasis Senior Advisors, who are our wonderful co-sponsors of this 15-week completely free complimentary program for dementia caregivers. And we would like to hear a little bit from both of them. So right now I'm going to welcome Tim Ivankovich, who is the CEO of Oasis Senior Advisors. And Amy, we're going to go ahead and ask you to mute just for a couple of moments, and while we chat with Tim, and then we're going to talk to RJ for a little bit. So Tim, welcome. How are you today?
I am great. Thanks again for having me on, and love the information. Amy, it's great to hear your insight of all this. It's really good information. So thanks for being with us as well.
So isn't she great? So tell me anything you want to add to this topic. What has Oasis Senior Advisors seen with this issue of work and caregiving?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our mission and focus is all about family, family first. And some of the points you brought up, I think, are so enlightening in that the things that you have to be aware of when you're deciding between work and home. And one of the misconceptions that we get from what we do in a placement service is that, we want to force people to get into assisted living or memory care, what have you. But that's the complete opposite. We are all about aging in place. And as long as we can keep that senior in their home, as long as it's safe and long as possible, that is our goal. And I hope it's the goal for everyone that deals with seniors. And we just love to be that resource when the caregiver has had enough and just can't physically do it anymore, mentally do it anymore, that they've got a great resource in Oasis to say, okay, let's find a great place for mom and watch them thrive.
And Oasis Senior Advisors is a completely free service. If you are getting to the point where you're thinking, well, at some point I might need to move mom, I might need to move my husband, or maybe my wife and I both need to move, they'll help you. They're advisors that will help you. And how many franchises are you up to now, Tim?
82 right now in 28 states.
And so they've been a generous sponsor to our program for the virtual book club for dementia caregivers, along with Hilarity for Charity. Anything else you'd like to add? Anything else new going on in the world of Oasis Senior Advisors today, Tim?
A lot of new stuff. We're growing, we're building, and really, like I said, we love helping the families, taking them through a very difficult and challenging time, and an opportunity like this to be in the virtual book club and help sponsor not just your program, but being a great synergistic work with RJ Merced and his group at Hilarity for Charity. It's just a great match, because all we're trying to do is help these caregivers as best we can, and I think this is a great course of action to help that.
Thank you so much, Tim. We really, really appreciate your generous support. And OasisSeniorAdvisors.com, if you are looking for some help, you just want to start looking around. If your loved one might need some help, dementia is very, very taxing. At some point, it might not be okay to keep that loved one at home. They can help you look for a place that might be appropriate. So OasisSeniorAdvisors.com. Thanks so much, Tim.
Jennifer, thank you. And thanks, Amy.
Now we're going to welcome RJ Mercedes from Hilarity for Charity. RJ is the Director of Programming and Development. Hi, RJ.
Hi.
So tell us a little bit about how Hilarity for Charity helps the working caregiver.
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Definitely want to thank Tim and Jen, and certainly Amy. I'm learning a lot just being on today's book club. So thank you for your expertise and just kind of how you're personally navigated through all of this too. So Hilarity for Charity has been around since 2012. In 2014, we established our North American in-home care grant program. So for caregivers that are looking for respite relief, they can apply for that relief through us. We partner with Home Instead Senior Care to provide these free hours to folks all around the country. We've awarded over 250,000 hours of care so far. And it's really unique. I mean, we get folks from all over the map. We have millennial caregivers, so we have folks that are in their 80s and 90s and caring for their spouses. I read all the applications that are coming through to our review committees, and there are folks that have to make some really difficult decisions like, I can't leave work, I can't pay for care, I have to leave my loved one at home and try to run out for lunch and make sure that they haven't left the house or they haven't turned the stove on. So it is amazing it's very humbling to see the care that these families are providing in the very difficult situations that they're in. So it's amazing to be part of an organization that's trying to support as many families as we can today.
When I tell people about Hilarity for Charity's respite grant program, I have to repeat it more than once because they're like, what? What? The respite grant program, you can apply at hilarityforcharity.org. They're a really amazing organization. And one of the wonderful things, and one of the things I think makes Hilarity for Charity so unique is that so much of the fundraising is done through young people, engaging young people through colleges and high school and getting them to understand what's going on with their grandparents, but sometimes even their parents, especially if there's young onset Alzheimer's or other dementias. So thank you all for what you do, RJ, and your team, hilarityforcharity.org. If you know anybody who could benefit from a respite relief grant, please direct them there. Or if you personally could, and also be on the lookout. If you're listening to this live, or in September of 2019, they're going to be launching a Brain Healthy program. So we're going to be hearing more about that as we get closer to that date. So thank you for everything you do, and thank you for sponsoring the virtual book club.
Yeah, and just one last thing. So we're also going to be launching a intergenerational storytelling competition in November. With a bunch of partners. AARP is one of them, Generations United, Memory Well, and the National Scholastic Press Association. So we're going to have high school and college students write the best profile of someone living with Alzheimer's or another dementia. So much more to come on that, but to the point you were making earlier around trying to get younger people involved in this fight and have a voice in it. So.
The interesting thing again about Hilarity for Charity, it founded by younger folks, and the 25% I believe it's 25% of all caregivers right now are millennials, and you're early in your earning period. If you have a parent who has young onset Alzheimer's and you're trying to earn a living, I mean, this applies to the millennial caregivers very much because it's really tough for them to make these decisions. So we're glad you're here, and we're glad you're engaging with young people and helping to get the word out about your grant program. So thanks for all you do, RJ, and Hilarity for Charity.
Thanks all.
So now back to Amy. Amy, thank you so much again for being here. So what I like to do is talk about if you've gone overboard. So if you need to course correct. So say you've quit your job, it's not working out well. You're missing the money, like you talked about. You thought it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it is. Or you're missing that free gym that you had access to. Or maybe you want to go back part-time. Or what do we do? How do we course correct? So I'm going to just start with you, Amy. What do you think? Like, how can people course correct if they've quit their job and they're thinking, hey, this isn't working out?
Well, the first thing to do is to assess the situation. So assess your loved one's current needs and how those are being met. Assess yourself and what your abilities are and what you can do now and what you could do if you went back to work. And then figure out how you're going to fill those gaps. So you might look at, say, your loved one, you've been providing all of their meals. If you go back to work, are you going to be able to do that? And if not, what are the options? Is there home delivered meals that they might be able to get? What needs to change in their situation? Is there a neighbor, a friend, another family member who can help fill that gap? So once you get a clear idea of what the situation is, then you can help better target your work. If you put it together and you do some work creating that team and you think, well, I think I could go back to work full time, then you look for a full-time job. But you may say, I don't think it's going to all work if I go full-time. Maybe I can do a part-time job. And so it helps you target more what type of work you're looking for.
Very, very well said. So one thing that I want to remind people is even if you're saying, you know what, finances are okay, that's not a problem. I'm not arguing with my spouse. I can afford the gym, everything. But you know what? I don't want to do this full time. That's nothing wrong with that. You're allowed to say, I need other things in my life. What do you think about that, Amy?
Absolutely. Even if you are doing it full time, it's so important to look at your life balance. And when you do start to feeling like you're getting lost in caregiving, that's when you need to figure out, okay, what's missing for me? My analogy that I use for taking care of yourself as a caregiver is the car, because this happened to me. I went to a gas station on fumes, so nervous that I was going to run out of gas. And so I pull up there. I'm so relieved I made it. I fill the tank up with gas. And as I pull out, I thought to myself, the car actually runs better with a full tank of gas. How about that? Like, it runs differently. And it's like, well, duh, right? But that was my aha moment. And I literally changed my life after that, because I started looking at what fills my tank. And you need quick tank fillers, like getting a cup of coffee or hugging your loved one or petting the animals or doing some jumping jacks. But you also need premium fill-ups, which is, for me, it was my Pilates class, having lunch with a friend. It might be, a few hours of something. It might be watching a movie with your loved one, which we watched a lot of musicals with my dad, that I absolutely love doing that. And then you need tune-ups, which is time completely away from caregiving. And then finally, your routine maintenance. And for most of us, sleep is at the top of the list for routine maintenance, but also eating right, healthy social interactions is a big one. So if you look at it this way in terms of the tank, is work going to help fill your tank? In what way is it going to help fill your tank? Is it, some of the things we've talked about socialization and your brain and your identity, those things are important to keep you full enough to keep functioning. And, I can't expect myself to run on empty and be just as efficient. That's what I was expecting of myself. I can still do everything. I'm just completely running on empty, but I can still be number one on all this. Well, it's just not possible. It's not practical. So think about that in terms of, if caregiving isn't, your tank is just getting emptier and emptier and emptier, how can you supplement that? How can you help fill yourself up if it's going back to work part-time or having more social interactions, etc.?
Definitely. And there's lots of, this is the message we keep repeating. There's lots of ways to be a good caregiver. There's not one way. Just don't think that you have to have your loved one move in, or you have to quit a job, or use a lot of shoulds. It's all about what works for you, what works for your loved one and your family.
What I did when I left my full-time job, I thought about how I wanted my life to be. I didn't think so much about the job itself, but how I wanted my life to be. And I wanted more flexibility. I wanted to be able to spend more time with my parents. I wanted to manage all of those things. And it's funny how when you focus on how you want things to be, how things start to fall in place. You know what I mean? And so think about that. Like maybe being a full-time caregiver isn't how you want your life to be, but you want to be there for your loved ones. You want to manage the care. You want to provide some of the care. Think about it in that realm and how you want to be and how you want to feel about your life.
Certainly, definitely good advice. Another reason that maybe you need to make the course correction is the money part of it. Maybe the money is not really a problem yet, but you want to avoid the spin-off effect for your kids. So I actually don't have kids, so I don't have to worry about that. But so I really do have to be mindful of the financial component so I can pay for myself. But what we see happening with a lot of people who do have kids is, you know, maybe they're paying for a lot for their parents or their uncle or their grandparents, and then their kids start to feel like, okay, well, I'm going to have to pay. I mean, I'm sure you, Amy, had these conversations with your parents being in this field. Anybody that works in this field probably has, because you want to make sure, is there enough? And if there's not going to be enough, if you're spending all your money on the older generation, will there be enough for you to take care of yourself? So that might be another reason sometimes a course correction might be needed, even if you don't need the money today.
Absolutely.
$300,000.
Yeah, you know that, and I can say that caregiving has been financially crippling for me. I've done a lot, and I'm still dealing with the repercussions of that. But so you really do have to look at the, and like you, I don't actually have children. I have lots of nieces and nephews, but you know, you don't want to, you know, you're not doing your loved ones any favor if in the end you wind up being dependent on the next generation, and that they don't have the resources they need to help care for you. And in the future, we're going to have fewer caregivers. The care ratio is changing. They're at one, in the 1990s, it was 7 to 1, 7 people in the age range to be caregivers, and to 1 person over the age of 80. You know, going forward, it's going to be 3 to 1. So we need to really be aware there's going to be more pressure on individuals providing the care.
Yeah, those numbers are staggering when you look at them, and the number of people that will need care and how few people there are. You don't need a good reason to go back to work. I just reiterate that if maybe your whole family's saying that you're doing a great job, and you know, now they don't have to take off of work, or they don't have to stop doing what they're doing because you're on call all the time. Or you don't have to go back to work if you want to volunteer. I think everything Amy said about filling that tank up resonates so well. It's such a wonderful analogy.
Thanks. I'm glad that works for you.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I love to ask this question. I want to see, do you think that you should discuss, if you decide you need to go back to work or you want to go back to work, if your loved one has dementia, do you have that conversation with them? Maybe they're accustomed to you being around all the time, and you're going to have to go on work trips, or you're going to have to go back to an office. Should you discuss it with them? So let's take a moment and see what everybody thinks. I'm really curious to hear what Amy's opinion on this is.
I definitely have some thoughts on this, especially after having lived it. You know,
absolutely. We're adding up those poll numbers right now.
Sometimes the polls are surprising, right?
They are. I thought the one that we did earlier was a little bit surprising.
Yeah, there were some surprises there for me too, I thought.
Yeah, some interesting. Okay, so 38% yes, 13% no, 50% maybe. Amy, what do you think?
So I think it depends on a lot of factors. One, it depends on where they are in the disease and the progression of the disease, what their abilities are to understand. I think it depends on your relationship with the person and how you communicate with them. I know with my dad, I was always able to talk to him. I always made it, my way of communicating with him was to talk to him as if nothing was different. He, no dementia to a certain extent. And I found that he very much responded when I spoke to him as an adult, talking over something with my dad, having him help me make decisions. That was a comfortable role for him. And I think it was important in terms of the energy between us for me to be upfront about things. There were times, it still makes me cry when I think about it. There were times when I kiss him goodbye in the morning and say, I'm going to my office, Dad. And there were times when he's like, okay, have a good day. And there were other times when he would cry and he would say, oh no, please don't go. Please don't go. Because I was a security for him. And, you know, it's hard. It's hard, but I was always honest with him and upfront and talked about how his work history and that I work too, and you know, that sort of thing. You have to kind of monitor where the person is in the disease, how you interact with them. You know, there is a long span with Alzheimer's when the person is probably a lot more with it than you think they are. So don't assume that they can't handle or understand the information. On the other hand, if you've had a lot of experience with them having really bad reactions to things, you have to learn how the best way to communicate with them is.
I couldn't have said it better. In so much of this, I'm a maybe person. Like said, it depends on so many different aspects. And what you shared makes complete sense. But I'm guessing that if you said, Dad, I know that maybe you took off work and now you have to go back, and he just had a traumatic response every time you talked about it, I'm guessing you would have pulled back and not had those conversations, right?
Right, and you use your good skills that you learn for communicating with someone who has dementia. If that happens, then you might divert and talk about something else and direct the attention somewhere else. With my dad, being a music therapist, music was always my greatest tool, and we'd start singing a song or something to get his mind off of that. You also, you know, learn about it's helpful to not remove things, but to replace them. So it might be, I'm going to go back to work, but so-and-so is going to be with you on a more regular basis. Isn't that great? Or I have this great place you're going to go to that's this adult day center where they're going to have fun and activities and meals, and, you know, and you work with them through the transition as well. You know, if you're going to be really changing their situation by you going back to work, it's not just a boom, one day I'm with you all the time and the next day I'm gone. You know, you have to help someone with dementia transition through these things gradually.
Right, for sure. So thank you, everybody, for participating in the poll. And again, it really does depend on what your situation is with your loved one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good mentally to say always yes, just because, you know, you want to keep communication going, keep open communication. But I would never jump to no until I've really evaluated the situation and looked at my individual loved one that I'm caring for.
Definitely. Well, this has really been a true pleasure for our audience and for me personally. I've been a big fan of yours, Amy, for a long time. Amy Goyer, thank you so much. Please consider picking up her book, Juggling Life, Work, and Caregiving. You can get that on Amazon. I see Amy's book in the same section my book is in Barnes & Noble all the time. And so you can get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, anywhere books are sold. And it's terrific. So Amy Goyer, thank you so much. And again, I want to just say a quick thanks again. We couldn't do this without Hilarity for Charity and Oasis Senior Advisors, hilarityforcharity.org, oasissenior-advisors.com. Any last words, Amy?
Well, just thank you so much. And it's great to meet you virtually, actually almost in person. And yeah, thank you so much for what you do. And just make sure that people know that there's support out there. AARP.org/caregiving is a great resource. We have a free Prepare to Care guide that you can download or request on the website as well. And, you know, just connect with other caregivers. Truly, I think, you know, all of us communicating, we learn the most from each other. So always try to do that. AARP does have an online community where you can go in there and post questions. I'm in there a lot answering things too. So, you know, you don't have to do this alone. In fact, you can't. You know, I can do anything, but I cannot do everything. So just always keep that in mind.
Great last words. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you next week. I actually will not be your facilitator. Stephanie Goldstein from my team will be your facilitator, and we're going to talk about the martyr syndrome in dementia caregiving. We will be back at the same time next week, 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern next week. And if you'd like to get a copy of Cruising Through Caregiving, 99-cent price on Kindle right now. It is one of the Kindle deals of the month for June. Very thankful to Amazon for that. And I'm going to let Darlene take us home.